claims that man-made carbon dioxide is the major cause of global warming. I'm not a denier of that, but I am sceptical of that claim.
That's Dick Warburton. He's just been appointed chair of the government's review of renewable energy. Well, one sceptic of the review itself is John Grimes, Chief Executive of Australian Solar Council. John Grimes, welcome to RN Breakfast.
Good morning, Fran.
Do you support conducting a review of the renewable energy target? Is it time?
Well, legislation said that the review needed to be conducted every 2 years, which is in itself a big problem. It means that our industry is under perpetual review. The last review, the findings of the last review were finally implemented just 18 months ago. So we have another review now, and particularly in an atmosphere where it looks like that bipartisan approach to renewable energy has broken down fundamentally. Until now, both sides of government have supported the renewable energy target, but for the first time we see a review process which looks like it's leading to a predetermined outcome, and that is the slashing or axing altogether of the renewable energy target.
What makes you say, from reading these terms of reference, it looks like it's a predetermined outcome?
Well, I'll give you an example. The last review conducted by the Climate Change Authority was headed by Bernie Fraser and, had people like Heather Ridout involved. Mm-hmm. Now, nobody would say that they are, huge boosters for the renewable energy industry. These are serious people who were taking an independent look at what was happening in the target. To have the sort of committee that's been announced today really is a grave concern.
Are you talking about Dick Warburton there?
Look, I think that the makeup of the committee, so the legislation also says that the review must be undertaken by the Climate Change Authority. Now, the government is trying to close down the Climate Change Authority, but I don't know how they're appointing somebody else to do the review when the legislation clearly states it needs to be done by the Climate Change Authority. So,
well, presumably they'll change the legislation if there's no Climate Change Authority, but just to get back to your concerns about the makeup of the committee, tell me your concerns.
Well, look, we're concerned because the terms of reference have basically left everything on the table. It means that there is that shutting down the target altogether has not been ruled out. There are mums and dads across the country, about 5 million of them, who have put in solar PV systems, for example. Many of those have put certificates into a process called the clearinghouse, and there is no guarantee by the government that $40 million in certificates will be protected in any way, and so we could see retrospective action. People actually lose money in the same way that governments in New South Wales and Western Australia have targeted the solar industry with retrospective changes.
Well, I don't know how you read that, though, into the terms of reference, because as I see it, and it does certainly mention the impact of renewable energy targets on power prices, and this is where the critics of the RET all focus their attention. But it says, and I'm quoting here, charged with looking at the economic, environmental and social impacts of the RET scheme, in particular the impacts on electricity prices, energy markets, the renewable energy sector, the manufacturing sector and Australian households. So if it is looking at the impact on the renewable energy sector and Australian households, presumably will take into account those concerns you were just mentioning there.
Look, I think that the government is looking to focus on, well, their prime narrative around this has been focusing on the cost of electricity for families and for small business. Mm-hmm. And look, that's not a bad thing, because I think that the real cost of the scheme, particularly solar PV in that, is extremely small, and those facts will come to light. The average electricity bill in Australia, less than 2% of that is made up by costs associated with the small-scale scheme. Let me just contrast that, Fran, to the amount that people pay for marketing costs for the large utilities. These are costs that have been allowed by the regulator for your energy company to tell you how good they are so that you won't change to another energy company. And they, AEMO say, by 2015 will make up 25% of the average bill.
I don't know that the government can do much about energy companies marketing, though, can it?
Well, what I'm saying is that there has been a demonisation of the costs of renewable energy, and that has been unfair and unwarranted. In fact, a very disingenuous campaign. So has there
been a warping, an unexpected or unanticipated warping of the market, though, to some extent? At the time it was enacted, the renewable energy target was 20% of the market, but due to falling electricity demand over the last 2 or 3 years, the renewable energy proportion of the market is over 20%. And that's what the energy companies and businesses paying, massive electricity prices are concerned about.
But that's the whole point. They're not paying massive electricity prices as a result. We did a study during the heat wave in Victoria and South Australia recently, and we found that solar was doing the heavy lifting at those really hot times of the day when the sun is shining, was actually bringing it down wholesale electricity costs by about 9/10. 9/10 what we saw in similar conditions in Victoria leading up to the 2009 Black Saturday bushfires. So we know that solar not only employs 18,000 people, is saving people on average half the total cost of their electricity bill. They're basically tearing their bills in half. That it's supporting 4,500 small businesses across the country and rural and regional Australia, the mortgage belts of our big cities. But it's also bringing the cost of electricity down during those peak times for the entire community. So we're doing some modelling about the cost of electricity, the cost of the impact, and in a couple of days we'll have more to say about
Okay. And that'll feed into the review, I suppose. The good thing about this is the renewable energy sector and industries like yours can present the case. But tell us now, for everyone listening, how has the renewable energy target worked for your industry, for the solar industry?
Look, it's been an unprecedented success. Tony Abbott says that he's focused on bringing power prices down. Well, 5 million Aussies around the country will tell him that the best way to bring your power bill down is to install solar PV. So instead of demonising this industry, and let's be clear, our industry is an existential threat to the vested interests of the big power companies that have been monopoly providers, have not been subject to competition, and they are really concerned and fighting back hard. I think the government should be focusing on supporting the choice of ordinary people, genuine choice about how they create and manage and use electricity, rather than protecting the monopoly position of the incumbents who've been there for 100 years.
And John Grimes, just finally to take you back to the question at the beginning, you were critical of the makeup of this committee, but why?
Well, look, I think the makeup will always give you an indication of where a committee is going to go. And if you get, somebody like Mr. Warburton, who just said in his grab, doesn't think that humans are responsible for changes in the climate, then I think that predisposes an outcome, and that's extremely concerning. He's joined.
What about the other members of the committee?
Yeah, well, look, I don't want to talk about individuals, but I think the flavour of it is such that we are concerned, and so yeah, that's we're concerned about that.
All right, John Grimes, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
John Grimes is the Chief Executive of the Australian Solar Council. As you heard, they're concerned about this looming inquiry now. We've got the terms of reference into the renewable energy target, and we'll follow that issue over the next few weeks and months, I'm sure. It's 8:15 on Breakfast.
Okay, well, it sounds like John Grimes is terrified to say what he really thinks in case he further alienates a committee which is already predisposed against renewable energy. Whereas what's going on is the more people put solar panels on the roofs of their houses or on sticks in their front yard or on top of their shed, and the more solar power is going into the grid, the more people are learning to conserve energy, the less electricity is being sucked out of the power stations. But the power stations pretty much still have to be there for all the factories and the industries and the shops and the street lights and all the sort of extremely high usage situations. I read a letter from a small business owner whinging and bitching about how much he was paying for electricity. He had a shop in a city suburb and he was paying $27,000 a month for electricity for all the lights and the fridges that he had. And the fridges didn't have doors on them because he wanted the customers to be able to just reach in and grab stuff on impulse. But because the people in the households are using less electricity, they're being taught to conserve it, the price per kilowatt hour has been rising because to maintain the generators and the power lines is a fixed cost, and if people use less coal-fired kilowatt hours, then the cost per kilowatt hour goes up because you've still got your maintenance cost. So, because they're kind of totally, completely in the grip of the vested big business interests, the Liberal national government has now appointed a man who says, "Oh no, I'm not a global warming skeptic. I merely doubt that the global warming is being caused by humans." So the fact that we've got 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and we've taken that up from 220 parts per million before the Industrial Revolution, and the fact that the global warming that we are seeing now is happening at a time when human emissions have raised carbon dioxide levels to the highest that they have been in 300 million years, and the fact that 99% of the scientists who are working on, accredited scientists, working on climate science, say that they are, 97% certain that it's humans who are doing it. That doesn't matter to him. What he's interested in is trying to cut the costs for his mates in big business. And he's been put in charge of reviewing Australia's 20% renewable energy target, because the Budgie Smuggling Wingnut is pursuing the fantasy that Australia can get its economy going by being a cheap energy country. And all this is going on at a time when the Indonesian Foreign Minister has called the Australian ambassador in, carpeted him, dressed him down, and told him that he's going to complain to the Americans about how Australian Navy vessels have been breaking Indonesian maritime boundaries while towing asylum-seeking boatloads of refugees from international waters across the Indonesian boundary, and either sending them back to shore or putting them in lifeboats when their own boats are sinking and sending the lifeboats into shore. And what does John Kerry, Senator John Kerry, have to say to the Indonesians? Well, he got there and he launched his introductory speech with a diatribe on the morons who are denying the reality of human-caused global warming. And Senator Kerry went to Indonesia and told the 215 million of them that the biggest threat to their lifestyle was global warming and the dickheads who don't believe in it. I think the Budgie Smuggling Wingnut is about to discover that the Americans, all 315 million of them, have made the calculation that 225 million Indonesians can drink more Coca-Cola and they can eat more Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's than 22 million Australians can. Especially as Australia's got a drought and nobody's got any money and their industry's shutting down. So once upon a time the third world was a place, but in the 5 months since the Budgie Smuggling Wingnut's government has been attempting to sour relations with Indonesia, and they've had a great deal of success at it, Australia has begun to import the third world to Australia. What a bloody achievement. Thank you, Tony Abbott, Warren Truss, Barney Baby Joyce, Jew Liar Bishop, Hunt, Morrison, Brandis, the whole fucking lot of you. You'll go down in history as the biggest dills that Australia ever put in Parliament. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao. What do you think? Huh? I know swamp wallabies with a better grip on alternative energy than anybody in the entire Liberal National Party government. My swamp wallabies live in the constant hum of photovoltaic electricity. They're not frightened of windmills. Tony Abbott has less common sense than your average swamp wallaby.